Welcome to Leadership and Life Chat with your hosts, me, Becky Ames.
And me, Mark Curtis. In each episode, we'll be illustrating how success in leadership is inextricably linked with success in life.
Whether it's leadership in business, society, family or friends, we're all leaders.
Using our experiences and a range of expert guests, we'll share secrets to boosting your health, wealth and self.
So let's get on with the show.
Welcome back to a new season of Leadership and Life Chat. Becky, it's good to be back in the hot seat again.
So good to be back.
And every time we plan for a new season, Becky, one of the things we have to do is be creative. We have to think about the episodes we're going to come up. So that leads me into today's topic, which is, I think it would be fantastic to talk about creativity and the process of creativity. Is something which we all need in business, because if we keep doing the same old stuff, we'll get the same results. And very often it's something which probably I find is lacking in a lot of businesses, especially professional service sectors, which we operate in. And I've recently read a book by the legendary music producer, Rick Rubin. And I think it's called The Creative Way. And Lizzie will definitely leave a link in the show notes for this. And for those of you who don't know Rick Rubin, it's worth Googling. Literally over the last 40 years, anyone he's worked with, he's the go-to person when bands are looking to kind of break through. I think he formed Def Jam Records back in the day, and his first band he worked with was the Beastie Boys. Licensed to Ill was the first album, and then he went on and the listeners of this show will know that I'm a bit of a metalhead from my younger days, and he produced Slayer's Rain in Blood album, which is one of my all-time favorites as well. So, I've got a personal vested interest in this book, but it is really good. So I think, Becky, today's episode is all going to be about really how we become more creative and how we can become creative in our business. What do you reckon?
That sounds good. When you suggested this, I must admit, I was immediately like, but I'm not creative. And I think this is why it could be so interesting to explore it, because I think we label ourselves that way, don't we? I'm an accountant, absolutely. I'm a business advisor. I'm not a creative, arty, crafty, person. So I think this will be really interesting.
Definitely, yeah. And I think before we get into sort of some of the tips that we want to leave with the listeners, one of the things which came through loud and clear from Rick Rubin is he doesn't believe there's such a thing as a creative or a non-creative person. He kind of says, look, creativity doesn't come from within, it comes from without. So all we can only ever be vessels for creativity. So creativity flows in and through us, not from within us. Therefore, if you take that as a starting point, it means that everybody has the ability to create. They've just got to be open as a vessel to allow the creativity to flow. So I think that probably is a good starting point. So at this point, anyone who's thinking to themselves, I'm not creative, guess what? You're right. It comes back to language. We've done episodes on language before. If we tell us, it wasn't it Henry Ford, if you think you can or can't, you're right. So Let's start with the premise that we can all be creative. And let's get into the show, Becky, and give the listeners some tips on how they can dispel those myths to themselves and create the right environment.
Absolutely. And I think as well, when you've been thinking about creative, it's the little things, isn't it? We're not suddenly going to become songwriters, artists, and able to, clearly that's a skill, that's a talent, but it's about bringing out that creative side of ourselves and really making the most of that, isn't it?
I think so, yeah. And again, maybe that's limited. Maybe we can all just become songwriters.
Maybe.
What wasn't it? Take that back for good. Gary wrote that in 5 minutes on the back of a napkin at a coffee break, didn't he?
I don't know. I'd say he's got more talent in that respect, but yeah, let's go with it.
So Becky, I think before we get into the first point, it's probably worth saying that prior to reading the book, I would have considered myself as a creative person. And I know at times maybe you've been the other side, which is you've gone, I'm not very creative. So we had a good chat about this before the show, and I can definitely reflect some of the points which we're now going to bring out. I can reflect on my journey and realize that I've become more creative as I've got older, and it's nothing to do with getting older. I just realize now that the journey I've been on, and I'll touch on this perhaps as we go through the points, I've become a greater vessel for a greater antennae for being a reception point, if you like, for creative ideas, which have then allowed to flow through me. So anyway, that sounds all quite cryptic. So I think now we should get into the first point. So do you want to kick off with that, Becky?
Yeah, so I think the first point we wanted to explore, which I find fascinating actually, is this thing about we say, we label ourselves, we're not creative, but is it trainable? Like you say, is it something that if we expose ourselves to enough outside influences or habits or different ways of thinking, that we can really tap into that creativity? And I have to say, I have seen that in you. I've known you a good few years now, and absolutely I've seen that creative side has absolutely come out. So what are the things that you think have really helped you develop in those ways?
Yeah, fair comment, and thank you. I think from my perspective, as I said, Rick Rubin talks about us being vessels for creativity, so it flows through us, not from within us. And one of the things he talks about in the book is meditation. Um, and he's meditated since he was 14 years old, I think he said in the book. And my meditation journey, I haven't started my medication, just self medication on a Friday night, but my meditation journey started probably about 10 years ago now. And I realized that actually that is very much linked with when my creativity really started to ramp up. I think I was relatively creative before that, but I can definitely see an inflection point. And the reason why he talks about meditation is because it allows you to observe from without and from within. So you're not just focused on doing and caught up in thought process all the while. You're just observing what's going on. If you come back to that vessel point, if we're observing what's going on around us, then we're much more likely to pick up sparks of inspiration, which then allow the creativity process to flow through us. And a great example he gave in the book was he said, like, if you're writing a song or a poem or anything, and you're struggling a little bit for creativity, just wander along to your local coffee shop, buy a coffee, and just sit there and listen and observe what's going on around you in the coffee shop. And he's like, 9 times out of 10, you'll hear someone say something and it'll be like, bang, that's it. That's
Mm.
kind of the spark again to get going. And I reflected, yeah, for me it's meditation, but equally it's also like running and cycling, because when I go running or cycling, my head empties. Um, Not that there's much to empty, but what little is there empties, and suddenly it makes room for other things to flow in. You're just observing nature. You're trying to take your mind off like the pain of the run or whatever, and then sparks of inspiration come to me that way as well. So I don't think this is kind of. I think anyone. So for me, anyone can do it. It's just about tuning into your five senses as much as anything.
Yeah, I can see that. And I think it's about letting everything sort of settle and the noise disperse so that you are really allowing those other senses to really, appreciate what's around you, isn't it? And absorb and
Mm,
observe, like you say. And I think I'm not as well practiced in this as you are, but I can see why it would help me if I did form better habits in this way, because I'm often like, there's too much in my head. And, if only I could delete some of the stuff that's going round and round, song words that you can remember from the 1980s, that you think that's just useless information. But if I could, when I do calm it all down and, sort of make everything that much calmer in my own head, that's when other stuff does, you allow it to flow, don't you? Whether
mm.
that's when you've surrounded yourself by people, like you say, a coffee shop, or even like, meditation is usually a lone activity, isn't it, when you take the time out. So I think it's finding those things that will work for you. So for me, I spin, which is exercise bike to loud music usually, but that's not particularly calming, but it does allow me to just switch off from everything else and puts you in a different state, I think, which mentally for me works really well. So
Yeah,
it's finding your thing, isn't it, and trying different
definitely.
things. And I know you've tried lots, really exposed yourself to lots of different ways of thinking and training, and your NLP program and things like that. So your understanding of what could work has grown over the years as well.
And what really resonated with me is I've tried to be creative over the years. And when I've tried to become creative, it just doesn't work. It's like, because it becomes forced. And I understand
Yeah.
why now. back at this book and the messaging coming out from Rick Rubin, I understand that I was trying to force creativity, and that's not the way it works. It has to come from without, flow through and out, and I'm trying to create it from within. And I try and do different stuff to use left and right hemisphere brain, because I think that helps with creativity as well. So I play a bit of music, I write a little bit of poetry, just because I want to try and do stuff different to my day job to just get my brain neurons firing in different ways.
Yeah.
And I was talking to Glenda about this, and I've got my little book of poetry, and I've got my own little style. And I very often, I've been out for a walk with the dogs, and stuff will just start coming to me, and then it'll be like, I don't know, it could just be like a beautiful frosty morning, and there was like, my dog was going wild chasing pheasants, and things like that. And it was just, I just thought, I just had all these like words I wanted to get out on a bit of paper when I got home. So I had breakfast, I just kind of banged this poem out in like about 5 minutes, but it just felt like it needed to come out at that point, and I felt like I was bursting with creativity. Other times at work, I've been thinking, we need to do this differently. We need to do
Yeah.
something differently here. How can I do it differently? How can I make it different? And it's been like forced, and it's been like, oh, it just hasn't happened. And then I've been out for a run or something, and then it's been like, oh, crikey, we could try this. So, I think I've seen both sides of it, which is I've been in the position of trying to be creative and it not happening, and then not trying to be creative and it suddenly comes to you. As I say, this really resonates with me, this stuff, because I've kind of seen it through my own lens, if you like. So I guess it is just about everyone finding, as you say, there's no right or wrong way to do this, but it is about trying to shut off the chatter in your head.
Mm.
Don't label yourself creative or not creative. Don't try and force it. Just kind of percolate on whatever it is, and it will just rise from within you, and it'll be like, like you'll have a eureka moment almost.
Yeah. And it's interesting, isn't it? Because in business, we often will have like a strategy day, or, you've got a blank sheet of paper, what are you going to do? And in that moment, you almost freeze. I think
Mm,
if you've labeled yourself as not creative, not an innovative person, perhaps, but at other times, if you manage to capture those ideas as they occur to you, probably when you've allowed your brain to calm and you haven't got all that chatter and that noise, that's when the brilliant stuff comes. And it's about making sure you capture it, like you say, giving yourself that 5 minutes to jot down your thoughts, your poem, whatever it was that came into your head. I think we're so busy that we expect to be able to do stuff in the time we've allotted in our day to do that
yeah,
task. And
yeah,
that's not how creativity works, is it? You
no,
can't diarize it as such. You can train yourself. And of course, in business, we have to keep moving forwards, and we have to do, those, we have to think strategically, and we have to make sure it's structured. But we also have to be aware that those things might occur to us at any time, and to not ignore them, to capture them, and just be open to it, I guess.
yeah, definitely. And yeah, as you say, very, very often, and for me, going on a slight tangent, this then almost comes down to sort of being a business owner. And it doesn't mean, this isn't just about business. Anyone can be creative in the business, and we'll come on to that, I suspect, on another point. But it's like being a business owner is not a 9 to 5 job. And if you're trying
Mm.
to like force, and we run strategy days and we get value out of them, and we
Yeah,
run them for clients and they get value out of them. But it is a bit of a shot in the dark, because you've got everyone in the room, and the people in the room need to be in a creative state. They need to have opened themselves up as a vessel for creativity at the same time, in the same room, on that
yeah.
day when you're running that session. And what are the chances? I would say
No.
pretty low. So I think there's definitely a point we should discuss in a minute around, well, if you're going to do a day like that, how could we actually get the best value out of it as a business? But coming back to what we can do as individual business owners, probably, if we looked at it, the best ideas we've ever had around things we've done differently and been more creative have happened outside of, in inverted commas, normal working hours.
Mm.
But then that comes down to being a business owner at times. You don't. People will say you don't switch off, and I think it's right. You don't switch off, but you're not actually switched on either, if that makes sense.
No.
It's coming back to this percolation point, isn't it? It's percolating in there, in the subconscious, and then it presents itself because of something else which is happening at 10 o'clock at night, or you're having a nice relaxing bath or something, and it's like that's when the magic happens.
Yeah.
So I think there is very much a, a role for formal strategic planning and creativity. How do you do that? But as an individual, it's very difficult to sit down and say, right, I'm going to sit in this room now and do it. Some people do, don't they? I mean, you think of some of the famous authors, and they treat it like a job. They will sit
Yeah.
down and write from 9 o'clock till 12 o'clock.
Yeah.
And even if they only write 2 words, it becomes a discipline to kind of get into a routine as well. So there's definitely a place for routine in this. But I think as a starting point, what we're saying is if you're coming from the angle of I'm not creative, you can be. You can
Yeah.
become that vessel for creativity. You've just got to create the environment to allow it to happen. Then you worry about structure later on when you become practiced at it and you actually become more open and skilled at achieving it.
Yeah. And I think your point about being business owners and you never switch off is true. There's degrees, isn't there, of being switched on, if you like. But I think, yeah, I agree. It's in those moments of where you're in more relaxed state that those ideas might come to you. And the difference probably is that you actually allow them to then develop into something as opposed to just dismissing them. I know in recent years I'm far more inclined to capture those ideas and to do something with them rather than just sort of go, oh yeah, maybe one day. So it's how you also manage those creative ideas and what you actually do with them and putting them into action for me,
Mm.
rather than just sort of letting them occur to you and letting them go, losing them, and recognizing that they could turn into something, and that you do have the ability, as you say, everyone has the ability to be creative.
Okay, so hopefully we've dispelled the I'm not a creative person myth with the first point there. Thanks to Rick Rubin again, because that was very inspirational on this whole vessel point. So if we then bring it into maybe a work context for the second, and business context for the second point, Becky, and we touched on it there almost, which is you could be having a session with a team with another business on how do we do things differently, how do we move towards our goals and ambitions and strategy, whatever it might be. So we've created this false environment where arguably not everyone in the room is going to be in open as a vessel at that point in time. So if we're going to kind of give some thought around that one, what could businesses do to make sure when they get people in a room, which is the opportunity cost of that is pretty high. How do we make sure that we get maximum value out of that?
So for me, as you say, we run these days with our team, or these meetings with our teams, don't we? We do this with clients as well. And there's really two elements for me. One is kind of setting the scene in advance to give people the opportunity to mull it over and have some thoughts in advance, and they're not having them sprung on them in the instance. Some people that works, doesn't it? You kind of say, right, tell me, what could we do with this? And they immediately spark into life. And others, they need a little bit of time to warm up and to really get into thinking about it. But I think we've both seen in practice that the best way of doing this when you've got a team and you give them the time out to actually do some of this stuff is to just make it really open. There's no wrong answers. Capture everything. So it's about brainstorming, isn't it? And then just allowing it to flow. So we use mind maps and things like that as teams, and really allowing that thought process to develop and the creativity to flow in the room, and one idea feeds off another, and where can it go? There's no wrong answers, there's no silly questions, you don't judge anyone, you don't comment at the time. Everything's a good idea. Capture it all. It will look messy. We love it when we see all
Mm.
of what's gone on, don't we? The busyness of how those ideas have flowed. But often something will come out because you've taken it, allowed it to go, and allow people that time to think freely and bounce off each other. And I think the key really is allow time
Mm.
for that to happen. You can't just go, right, you've got 30 minutes, go. It's not going to work. Those ideas will gradually come. And if you've got a mix of people around the table that bring different things to it as well, I think that's when the great stuff really happens. But for me, it's about giving them permission to do that as much as anything, taking them slightly outside of their usual role.
Yeah, I
And
agree.
just
I mean, I think you if you had if you had like 10 people in the room, there's probably going to be one or two people who are open vessels, in all likelihood, and they're going to be the ones who are going to get the something flowing to start with, probably. And as
Yeah.
you say, other people then start to bounce off their ideas, even people who would deem themselves as not creative start to contribute because the environment changes around them. So I'm
Yeah.
with you. That really makes a difference, doesn't it? The other thing which we've done quite a lot on strategy days, I always like to have icebreakers at the start of a day, because you get a load of people in a room, and for 80% of the people in the room, it feels a bit uncomfortable. They're not really looking forward to it. They're a bit nervous, even if you've given them some kind of pre-workshop homework almost to kind of try and get things flowing a bit. They're still a little bit guarded in the room. They're just not open at that point in time. So one of the things I always like to do is to just open up with an icebreaker. I've never actually said, right, we're all going to do a 20-minute guided meditation. I'm not sure how that would go down in most business environments. I think probably it'd be like, out, gone, out,
Yeah.
Curtis, off you go. But that, and most people are not, the majority of people are not practiced in meditation, so it would be a fruitless exercise anyway, because they'd just be sitting there with their eyes shut, feeling really self-conscious, thinking everyone was looking at them, or something like that. So the couple of things I've done on workshops with clients. The first one is a listening exercise, which we've talked about on the podcast previously, where you just have a bit of an icebreaker, ask people, who thinks they've got great listening skills, and then a few put their hands up, and then I send most of them out of the room. One of them I relay a story to with some pertinent key points in it, and then the next person comes in. It becomes a bit of a Chinese whisper thing.
Yeah.
And then the last person has to relay the story to the rest of the room. And you can imagine it just resembles nothing like. So it's a bit of an icebreaker, but it just gets people thinking, and like maybe a bit of creativity flowing through them.
Yeah.
The other one, which I've done as well, which is great fun, is draw your vision. So we give people a pen and paper, and we're just like, what direction is the business? Just draw your vision. What is the business going to look like in pictorial terms in 5 years' time? And it's like, you don't have to be Picasso here. And I always hold up my personal one, and at the top of it, I always write, Mark Curtis aged 48 and a half. So it's like a bit of a joke, and everyone has a laugh about it. And I've got my matchstick men and stuff on there. But again, it just makes people do something different, and it shocks them out of their normal position.
Yeah.
And everyone has a go at it. I've never ever done that with a group of people in a business session where they haven't had a crack at it, and then they explain what it is, and everyone's going, "Oh yeah, I see that," and that just shifts their mindset, and it opens them up a bit more to creativity. So there's things we can do at the start of our sessions as business leaders, which can really help create the right environment. And if we just go in cold and it's like, right, we're going to do this, this, and this, it's going to take a lot of people a long while to warm up, if in fact they ever do on that day. So
Yeah.
I think, coming back to this, is there stuff we can do to help people open up as a vessel, even if they don't realize that they're being opened up as vessels, which you could argue is manipulative. I think it's positive manipulation, if there is such a thing, because it's going to
Yeah.
help them get the most out of the day. So there's things we can do as business leaders to really help our teams with this.
Yeah, I agree. And I think once you've done an icebreaker like that, people let their barriers down a little bit, don't they? And their guard, and they really sort of go, okay, it's all right to have a silly idea or get something wrong, or and it's almost, you can see the creativity starts flowing because they've let that guard down a little bit. And it might be they're with people that they don't know very well, or they do know well and they don't want to look silly in front of. So you do have to have all of that going on. And I think as a leader, and you said some people coming to those workshops will have loads of ideas. It's their role as well to encourage others to contribute and draw out of them. So don't dominate, don't take over, don't allow someone to dominate, because then others will just get bored, switch off, disengage, won't they? But out of those, I mean, I know you're the same. I don't think I've ever run one of those workshops and there hasn't been some absolute gems that come out of it. And it's often from the people that you would kind of, they surprise you in a really great way. It's not that you've dismissed the fact that they don't have any creative thought, but if you allow them the space and the time and in the right environment, it's fantastic what people come up with. And also that whole process of getting there as a team means they're engaged with, okay, so what are we now going to do? So they've really bought into, they've been involved in devising the idea that's come out. It's a collective thing, isn't it? And then often it's much easier to see it through to fruition because they've been involved in that whole process.
And if we can keep creating environments where our teams feel open to things, then maybe we help open more people in our businesses up as vessels for creativity. We could clearly go through programs with them to help them with meditation or whatever it might be as well on an individual level. But as a collective team level, I think what we've probably demonstrated there from both of our experiences that we've seen ourselves and with other businesses is we can actually help the team become more creative, even though they don't realize in that situation that what is happening is they're becoming more creative.
Yeah.
But they're opening up as vessels at that point in time.
Yeah, definitely.
So we've covered off 2 points there, Becky. We've covered off, okay, as individual leaders, this is stuff we can do on an individual level to become our open vessels for creativity. And we then gone on to, okay, but practically in a team environment, when we're back in the business, what can we do if we're having a session without having to kind of go through, like, we need to open you up as vessels to become more creative?
Yeah.
What can we actually do? How can we create that environment to make it happen? And I think we've given some ideas of things we've worked on and things we've seen that have worked in the past as well. So if we were then going to go on to a third point, if we were going to look at one thing which you could argue is perhaps the biggest killer of creativity, what would it be?
I think it's, we talk a lot about developing good habits, don't we? And meditation is one of those, I know for you. It's not going to be for everybody. It might be that some people, that's not an appealing thing. But I think that routine can be really stifling. So there's good habits. Yep, great, things that we want to make sure we repeat, do, and we grow through those. But the the day-to-day routine can really stifle creativity, and I think we need to recognize that in ourselves. And I know we were chatting before we started recording about someone that you mentioned that when they go to the same city on business, they don't stay in the same hotel or they don't take the same route to the office, and just by switching it up like that, their brain is alert and really aware of their surroundings. And we all have that thing, don't we, where we drive the same route to work every day, and sometimes you're like, I don't remember the drive. I don't actually remember how I got here, because it's so familiar and you're kind of on autopilot. And when you're in that state, we're never going to be creative. So even if you have to take the same route every day, for me, it's about exposing yourself to not the same playlist on your Spotify every day or whatever platform you use, but it's about mixing it up and, trying different things and making sure you're exposing yourself to different influences. Because otherwise, if we keep doing the same, as one of our partners always says, you're only going to get the same. And I think for me, if I'm not going to meditate, because maybe that's not where I want to be at the moment, what practical things every day could I just tweak a bit that would perhaps make me just open a little bit more to outside influences, thinking differently, just get my brain out of that sort of stale, I don't know what it is, that sort of just that autopilot, probably for me is how I would describe it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a great point. I mean, breaking routines is huge, isn't it? Because, as I've said on the podcast loads of times, a personal development trainer I had back in the late 90s said, like, if you keep going to your sock drawer, you're only ever going to get socks. If you want something different, you have to go to a different drawer, and it's true, isn't it? You keep doing the same thing, you're going to get the same results. You keep going to your sock drawer, you're going to find socks. Don't be shocked about it. And to be a vessel for creativity, you've got to allow different experiences to flow through you. So if you're not going to allow different experiences to flow through and around you, then it's going to be very difficult to be creative. So I can see how the two are inherently linked. And it was actually Damien Horner, a previous guest on the podcast, who marketeer extraordinaire, who was talking about, takes different routes through. He buys different newspapers. He just challenges himself to think differently, and that helps open him up for creativity and different idea generation. And we touched on this on that podcast as well, which is something like the human brain is like 5% of our body weight or something, but it uses 20% of the calorific energy that we burn a day. So the reason why we have routines as human beings is because without those shortcuts, we'd be exhausted. I mean, it might be a great way to lose weight. Even maybe this is a revolutionary new diet. Hey, think your way to thinness or whatever. We'll have to look into this. But if it's such a heavy duty calorific toll and energy usage for our body, we do most things on autopilot, subconscious level, because otherwise it would be truly exhausting. And and I think I know myself that sometimes when I'm going through creative processes, you almost feel drained at the end of it, and you think, well, how can it be that difficult? And that's why, because your brain is having to fire new neurons, it's having to connect different neurons together, and it's challenging you to do it differently. It's pretty tiring, and that's
Yeah.
why there is a physiological reason why it's quite tiring to do things differently. It's like if you drive somewhere differently you've never been before, certainly pre sat nav, and you had to really think about and concentrate where you were going. You get to the end of that journey and you feel absolutely wiped out, don't you? It's
Yeah.
like, wow, you just want to go to sleep. So this is going to happen in this process as well. But if we don't break the routines, then we're not going to be able to be as creative as what we could be otherwise. Equally, we then have to say, well, do you know what? I'm gonna limit when I break routines, because I've got to manage my energy. I'm
Yeah.
running a business. I'm a business leader. I'm a business owner. I've got to have enough energy to deliver on the day job. Yes, creativity and change is important to, not stand still, consolidate and die, or whatever the phrase is. We don't want to go backwards here. But if I'm just trying to go forwards all the while, I'm going to exhaust myself, and I'll probably exhaust my team as well around me.
Yeah.
So it's got to be a managed position. So it's almost like do this as a premeditated thing. So yes, I am going to go to a different coffee shop. Yes, I am going to walk in a different way on, every week on Tuesday or whatever. It's building it into your routine. Build a routine of when you're going to break your routine maybe as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And for a lot of people, or probably all of us, routine is comfort, isn't it? It's what we recognize, it's what we're comfortable with. It doesn't take, like you say, any thought particularly, and it's safe a lot of the time. And that's, we need some of that, of course we do. But if we allow ourselves to stay in that state too much, that's when our brains will just go, okay, so I don't need to try and do anything different, and that's when, as you say, we will lack any creativity. So it's even, for me, it's about just watching different news channels or reading different news articles, so that you're being challenged to think in slightly different ways, not just following the same social media accounts all the time and being fed the same, messaging all the time. And yeah, like you say, different environments. I always find that if when I go to the coast, on the beach, that's when my brain literally just goes, zoom, okay, now we're in calm state. And I think it's just that exposure to different elements, different environments, but it's not my norm. So it's great. It takes me out of my everyday. So
Yeah.
I think anything you can do like that and recognize it in yourself. What are those things that will work for you? And factor those in. And of course, you can't do it all the time. And none of us could live in that state all the time, could we?
Yeah.
We'd be like the eager puppy that's being exposed to all those different noises and just on constant high alert. That's not sustainable at all, and it's not a great place to put our teams, as you say.
Yeah.
So yeah, being conscious for me, as I often say on these podcasts, about what are my things that will really help me in that way to think differently and not be comfortable all the time.
Yeah. And it just made me think as you were talking there, Becky, the episode that we did on havening technique,
Yeah.
and how it can help kind of bring a calming. Was it? I think it was delta brainwaves, wasn't it? It brings in a calming effect. So just that kind of mental break on just a technique like that. And honestly, if anyone hasn't come across havening, really worth a look at our episode we did on that. It's really, and Becky was the guinea pig as well, which was
I
really good.
was.
Again, that shift of state, isn't it? It's just doing
Yeah.
something slightly different to
Yeah.
just it's just altering your state of consciousness, but not in a wacky kind of, oh my god, am I going to disappear into the 25th dimension or something? It's just a case of just changing it up a little bit, isn't it? Or changing it down, as the case may be.
Yeah. And it's safe and easy to try. I'm not as informed on these things as you are, and I'm not as practiced on these at all. And yeah, it was brilliant, as anyone who watches it will see.
Well, talking of that, I'm about to embark on my first shamanic drum journey session, so that could be another way of changing our state of consciousness. I'll let you know how that one goes.
I've no idea what that is.
We might have to do an episode on it at some point.
Oh
So
God.
anyway, I think Becky, I think we've probably got to the end of our third point there, and
Yeah.
just to remind ourselves, we started off around, this was all based on the book I'd read, The Creative Way by Rick Rubin, which I would highly recommend everyone takes a look at. It's an easy read, but there's so much good stuff in there. And hopefully it dispels the myth, and we've been able to carry that message through here today as well, which is there's no such thing as a creative person. There's no such thing as someone who isn't creative. All we can ever be are vessels to allow creativity to flow through us. So our job is just to become an open vessel. And the first point we talked about is, well, how do you do that as an individual? And we talked about, meditation was raised, going for a run, cycle, anything which just gets you in the state where you're much more aware of what's going on around you. That really opens you up to the art of the possible. The second point we talked about was, well, what about if you're in a team environment and you've got your team together for a strategy day, or you're trying to drive some change through your business? How do you get the most out of those days when you've potentially got a room full of people where 80% of them are not in a creative state of mind at that point in time, or maybe it's not their normal way of being? How do we create that? And we talked around some of the things we can do around icebreaker exercises, brainstorming, and really just kind of letting the room flow, and people will change their state as the day goes on. And then the third thing we talked about was one of the things which can perhaps stifle creativity for all of us if we're not careful, which is routine. And just breaking routines occasionally will do. It's enough to open that space up, just to allow the brain to get into a different place, to maybe spot different things that it otherwise wouldn't have spotted. And it opens us up again to become creative. So hopefully everyone has enjoyed the show and realized that actually, hey, we can all become creative. Maybe we're not going to have #1 singles and have an album produced by Rick Rubin, but we might be able to make some changes in our business, which allows our business to go from strength to strength and not to stagnate effectively, because creativity just avoids stagnation, I think, a lot of the time. So I think, Becky, that really just leaves us to say a massive thank you to Rick Rubin. He's probably never going to listen to this podcast, but he's never going to know quite how influential he's been in terms of opening this up as an understandable concept around creativity. And hopefully that has allowed us to share it with our listeners as well. So all of the main things we've discussed will be in the show notes today, including links to the previous episodes and also to Rick Rubin's book. If you enjoyed today's show, please rate and review us on your platform of choice. If you leave us a 5-star rating, it really does help other people find this podcast. And finally, a massive thank you to Larkin Gowan, sponsors of this show. Without Larkin Gowan, this wouldn't be possible. So check out their website to see how their team of experts can help you and your business.